So Israel has started some crazy attacks on Hezbollah, and the situation is only escalating as we sit here and record right now. We need to go over everything that's happening, why it's happened, and I think the place to start is with pagers.
Yeah, that's the place to start.
Right? So we get a report like a week ago or something that a ton of pagers in the pockets, like on the hips of people in Lebanon, blew up at the same time, right? Like thousands of these pagers blow up, and thousands of people get injured from it. I think something like 17 or maybe 20 people die from the explosion. And of course, this is all in Lebanon. It starts to trickle out that they were targeting Hezbollah. We don't know who. Well, we all know that it was Israel, but Israel doesn't immediately own up to the attack.
It's interesting because Israel doesn't immediately own up to how they even did the attack, right? We still don't know how they got the pagers to blow up.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting question because it calls into like war crime questions here.
Oh.
Because did they booby trap these pagers and then sell them to people on purpose for the purpose of later blowing them up? And you can't booby trap things by international war standards. But then also, is it technically a booby trap? Because the definitions are so murky that it's difficult, but it's at least calling into question the ethical nature of how Israel laid out this attack. Because obviously we don't think that they just, I don't think that they just electronically triggered lithium batteries to just explode out of nowhere.
You can't do that.
You can't do that.
No, that's physically impossible. So they had to have planted explosives at some point along the supply chain. What we know, I believe, is that the pagers were manufactured in Taiwan. I think they might have been assembled in some way in Hungary or something. And so what this means is, and the reason this is important, is it means that Israel's intelligence capacities are such that they can infiltrate this process at some point in the supply chain and covertly plant explosives in thousands of these pagers.
I didn't necessarily think of that angle, but you're totally right. I mean, this speaks to the absolute insanity that Israel is able, the insane nature in which Israel is able to infiltrate these terrorist groups. It calls into question, like, well, I mean, for me, my initial reaction is, if they're so sophisticated with this, why is it that so many other actions Israel has taken has negatively impacted civilians in the way that they have? If they've been able to do such incredible, espionage work in the other way.
Okay, to me, it calls into question, why didn't they see October 7th coming more than anything else, which we've speculated about before. We don't really have a concrete answer there, besides the fact that they get a ton of these threats all the time that they pick up. But I think it's important that they decided to use this attack to show off the espionage capabilities because of the deterrent factor.
For sure.
Of it.
For sure. I think, so now let's get into the next part here. So, and this is also a huge escalation from Israel, right? They have not been at war with Lebanon. They have not been fighting Hezbollah. They've been fighting Hamas. For the majority of this campaign right now. They've been fighting in Gaza, okay? It's very important that we remember that Hezbollah and Hamas are two separate and distinct organizations.
Yes, they're both backed by Iran. They are allies in the, quote, axis of resistance, but they're different things.
Yes, different things, different leadership structures, fundamentally different operations, different people involved, different countries. So the fact that they're now turning their focus onto southern Lebanon, which is another, United Nations fully recognized state, it calls into question the Lebanese sovereignty too, which is a huge problem.
Yes, and this is where things really change from the Gaza situation, right? Because Gaza is not a state, so there's a different line that's being crossed now, and Israel still has some kind of basis to make these attacks because after October 7th and the Israeli invasion of Gaza, Hezbollah took the opportunity to lob some rockets across the border, right, to basically get some publicity to be and to show that they were in solidarity with Hamas, because Hezbollah is very much Iran's like most competent and capable proxy.
Yeah, I totally agree. Hezbollah is like actually a pretty sophisticated military operation. It's not like Hamas.
Yeah.
Okay, Hamas is not really comparable to Hezbollah.
Yeah, not at all. But the crazy thing about that, because you say that Hezbollah is a really it's a complex organization. And yet Israel 3 days ago, dropped about 50 bombs on a suburb of Beirut, which housed like the leadership of Hezbollah, and they killed I think it's Hassan Nasrallah,
Mm-hmm.
something Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah. The leader of Hezbollah for 32 years, the person who he has been like their bin Laden. He has been their figurehead, like their I need a better word. Demagogue,
Leader,
kind
demagogue?
of.
Okay, I like demagogue. I like
Yes.
demagogue. He's been the cult of personality that Hezbollah has been able to really sufficiently rally around.
Exactly. And he's consolidated the power so much there that first of all, it's wild that Israel was kind of able. Israel, again, its intelligence like infiltrated Hezbollah so exactly, so to such an extreme level that they knew exactly when they were meeting, exactly where they were meeting. They were able to drop the bombs at the perfect time, and they take out the leadership. And at this point, nobody really knows who can even give orders in Hezbollah.
Yeah, it's extremely crippled, and that's what happens when you develop an organization around a cult of personality figure, right? Once that dude's gone, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah.
But let's talk into how this operation went down. So the where these guys met, like you said, was in a suburb of Beirut. They were supposedly meeting in a tunnel that was going on underneath this suburban area. Now, on top of the ground there were large apartment buildings where people were supposed to be, or people were. All right. And in order to get into these, in order to penetrate the ground and hit the targets, the Hezbollah leaders, they used extremely heavy munitions, 2,000 pound. I think it was 2,000 or 5,000. It's one of those. It was either 2,000 or 5,000 pound bombs, penetrating the ground, destroying the buildings, going underground, and immediately eliminating the Hezbollah leader. Now, Israel did warn the civilians a couple days before to leave the area. They did not give an immediate warning to the attack, as far as I'm aware. Okay. And again, this calls into war crime questions. From my understanding, it's technically they can argue that it's not a war crime because you don't have to give civilian notice for an attack if it would disrupt the surprise nature of your assault and then stop it from being a successful operation.
Okay.
If giving that warning would directly lead to the failure of the operation, you don't have to give warning.
Okay. So I guess that gets at the ethical question a little bit more. However, it is important to say that like 700 or so civilians have died.
Yeah.
In Lebanon because of the attack so far. And I want to get to the bigger picture question here of like why.
Mm-hmm.
Why is Israel making the attacks? And I'm curious what your take is.
I have a couple takes. I think Benjamin Netanyahu is struggling to hold on to power for as long as he has. I think he needs the war to keep going for as long as possible. And I think he knows that the situation in Gaza is kind of winding down in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. He's kind of won that out.
Yes.
The only thing that he could do now if he wants to keep consolidating his power in Gaza is literally just exterminate everybody in there.
Yeah.
Right. I think that there is a zealotry in the Israeli right that wants to conquer southern Lebanon. They just want it, and they're going to take it, and they want to conquer it. And so I think that zealotry is going on in there. And then I also think there is a valid concern for security reasons about wanting to take out the leaders of Hezbollah. So it's these three vertices that are all intersecting right now. And Netanyahu just thinks now's the right time.
Okay, I think I'm mostly with you. As far as the national security, there is an element of that. Northern Israel, the villages on the border have had to be evacuated for many months now because of the rockets that Hezbollah have fired into the territory, and Netanyahu has used that as his rationale.
Yeah, it's the justification.
It's his justification. I think you're right about Netanyahu's personal ambition / motivations. He needs to hold on to power, and we have seen a pretty big polling bump for him since he made this attack. So from his own political standpoint, it was a good calculation, I think. As far as conquering the territory, I'm more skeptical of that.
That they even want to, or that they can?
Either.
Yeah.
But also want to being like, again, because it is a UN, it's a recognized country, even though Lebanon's in a weird place because it technically has a government, but the government is so weak that Hezbollah is still the more powerful group in the country.
Yeah.
So the UN and any other power, including the US, is not going to be really okay or happy, I don't think, with Israel going in and saying, we now rule these square miles of
No
Lebanon.
one is going to give them legitimacy
Yeah.
of annexing any parts of Lebanon or even occupying any parts of Lebanon. There's really, no one's going to give them legitimacy.
And I don't even think it's hard for me to imagine that that even the Israeli government really wants to do that. Like I think the far right in the Israeli government, as much as they do want to annex the West Bank and they want the river from the sea to be Israel's and the Jews, I don't think they are as attached to the Lebanese territory.
Do you think that they are? So, do you believe that they are in this totally to just destroy Hezbollah and not go into Lebanon in another ground enforcement way? Or
God, it's so hard. No, because we see right now, earlier today, they are making preparations for a ground incursion.
Right.
So they're definitely about to invade. But I don't know what the objectives are besides Netanyahu needing to continue the chaos.
Yeah. Listen, I think after this, when this is all over, and we look back maybe 10 years from now, this action, whether we like it or not, is going to bring more peace to the region.
Okay.
I don't think it's going to be bringing more justice to the region. But without the leader of Hezbollah and without the structures of Hamas, there actually isn't going to be a resistance movement that's going to be able to combat Israel's expansion.
This is a really interesting point.
And so there will be peace, but there will not be justice.
Yeah.
And that's really, really tragic. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean that I want Hamas to stay around. I don't want Hezbollah to stay around. But it means it looks like Israel is winning this decades-long war.
Yeah.
And they look like they're just going to get what they want out of this.
Well, because I think then you need to zoom out to being like, this whole thing is kind of Israel versus Iran.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's Israel and the U.S. and the Arab countries that they've kind of made peace with, Saudi Arabia, UAE, more or less, versus Iran and its proxies that everyone is scared of, including Saudi Arabia, even if Saudi Arabia doesn't love Israel or the U.S. by any means.
Yeah, I agree.
And it just speaks to the fact that regional hegemony is still a force for peace.
Yeah.
Even though the way that they have to get there is war. It's hard. I'm reluctant to frame it that way.
I know.
Because it sounds terrible.
Yeah.
But if anything, like what we've seen from what Israel is doing to Gaza to what Israel is doing to Hezbollah to how it killed one of Hezbollah's top commanders in Iran, or was it the other way around where it killed one of Iran's?
No, it killed one of Hamas's leaders in Iran.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. It killed, yes. And it bombed the Iranian consulate in Beirut.
Yes, that is right. That is right.
They're taking all of these actions with impunity and without any real response. The escalation that they're doing is not getting equivalent escalation on the other side.
It's interesting because Iran actually is not responding to Israel's obvious escalations, and that's we have to frame. It's also important to recognize that, which I don't think we've said yet. This bombing in Hezbollah to destroy their leader was an escalation.
Oh my God!
Nothing else. But it's difficult because we have two political leaders in the country, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, and both of them are praising the attack. And it's hard for me because also I kind of praised the attack. I'm glad that the guy is dead. It's better for everybody that the guy is dead.
Yes.
Right. And so it's just a really difficult situation because it's hard because we're looking at this coin here where it's like we don't believe that Israel should be annexing southern Lebanon or going in or invading. Okay, even if they don't annex, but we also believe that the leader of Hezbollah absolutely deserved to die.
Yeah, and the reason that it's so clear in the U.S. at least that the leader of Hezbollah had to die is because he was the mastermind of an attack that killed a bunch of U.S. Marines in the 80s.
Yes.
He has been around since then. So it's almost like a bin Laden situation in that way where it's like, we're going to do whatever we have to get him. But what's hard for me to think about is, okay, we seem to be going towards the path of Western/Israeli/Saudi hegemony in the Middle East. Isn't that probably a bad thing based on the direction Israel is going?
Well, it is a bad thing because, like I said, peace and justice are not the same thing. Okay, and it looks like we're about to have an unjust peace.
Yeah.
And what that's going to mean is the fight for Palestinian liberation is going to become much, much, much more difficult because they're going to lose every card that they had in their hand.
Yeah. I mean, Palestinian liberation it's not even in the picture.
No, it's not even on the table right now.
No.
You know, and you have Arab countries at the United Nations saying like, please work with us. Please, let's have a two-state solution at the 1967 borders. But Israel's just reluctant to take that gamble, or not the gamble. They're reluctant to take the deal.
Totally.
They're like, oh yeah, we would have accepted the 1967 borders in 1967, but you tried to kill us a bunch of times after that. So now, screw you.
Exactly. And I mean, that's the whole 70s,
history.
80-year history we're dealing with.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the U.S. is a complicit partner, which we have to obviously call out. We've said many times.
And there's no political party or sizable political movement that wants to stop that partnership. It just doesn't exist.
No,
it doesn't exist.
So this isn't. It's almost like we can protest against what's happening with our words on our podcast in this bedroom in Boston, but to me, it's mostly what we're doing here is just kind of reporting how things are going to go.
Yeah,
and it's that Israel is going to keep expanding. It's going to keep applying its leverage that it has because it's kind of clearly becoming the biggest power in the region militarily, and it's obviously a big economic power, and it has us following it with our big stick.
Yeah.
And it will just continue to go down this path, and that path will be warlike as long as I think any of these Iranian proxies or anyone else are even putting up whatever kind of resistance it might be.
Last question, because this has been a great conversation. Last question. Do you think that the Iranian proxies are going to Iran is going to stop funding these proxies? Do you think that they're just going to give up? And they're going to be like, wait a second. Oh my God, we have to build it all up from the ground up again. We have to do all this all over again. We have to find a new guy to lead Hezbollah. We have to build out all this Hamas infrastructure. Are they just going to give up? And if they give up, Israel's security is set, but Palestinians then have no leverage.
I don't think they're going to give up because of how religiously motivated they are.
Yeah, sure.
I think ideology will trump pragmatism.
Sure.
And for the IRGC to stay in control, I think they kind of need to keep being the little guy standing up to the West.